Okay, and we are live streaming. John, if you'd like to kick off.
Okay, welcome everyone to this Senedd cross-party group on biodiversity. My name is John Griffiths. I'm a member of the Senedd for Newport East, and together with my colleague Dennis Jewell, who is also on the call, who's a regional member for South Wales East, we chair this cross-party group. Today we're concerned with biodiversity and nature targets, and as a Senedd, we declared a nature emergency, and following that, Welsh Government committed to bringing forward a bill, which we are eagerly awaiting, as there's about a year of this Senedd term to go. So it'll be forthcoming pretty quickly, and that will bring forward, amongst other things, legally binding nature recovery targets, as well as an independent environmental governance body. So that's going to be very, very important. And in this meeting today, we have the Deputy First Minister, Hugh Irranca-Davies, who has responsibility for the bill and the environment generally, along with other things. So we'll hear from Hugh. And we'll also hear from Wales Environment Link with a few speakers on these issues. We will have a Q&A, and we will also deal with some internal matters, the AGM of this cross-party group following the speakers and the discussion. So, you know, it's really important, as we all know, that Wales makes further progress on these matters. There's a lot of work to do, and hopefully this bill will help us make that badly needed progress. I know all of you are very aware of a multitude of issues around biodiversity and nature recovery. And although this bill, you know, it won't do everything, it will be very significant, we think, in moving matters forward. So let's get on with our speakers. And first of all, Annie Smith, Head of Nature Policy and Casework for RSPB Cymru. Annie.
Diolch yn fawr, John. Bore da pawb. Great i weld chi gyd. It's great to see you all. I'm just going to share my screen. Can someone tell me if that has worked?
Not yet.
No.
Okay. I didn't press all the buttons.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yes, there we are.
Great, thank you. So I'm starting us off with a bit of background and setting out a bit of Wales Environment Link's thinking on key biodiversity targets. And I'm going to pass on afterwards to Catherine WWF, who's going to talk specifically about pollution-related targets, and then to Rachel from Plant Life, who's going to talk about translating ambitious targets into action at different levels. Bear with me. There we are. So just to recap, in the last few years, in the background to this forthcoming bill, there's rightly been a lot of focus on the Global Biodiversity Framework, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which is the post-2020 global agreement on biodiversity, finally came to pass at the end of 2022 after long delays due to the pandemic. The framework embeds a mission to take urgent action to reverse the loss of biodiversity by 2030, and a long-term vision to see nature restored and people living in harmony with nature by 2050, supported by 4 2050 goals, which in turn are supported by 23 targets. And in basic terms, the goals kind of describe what good looks like, while the targets set out how we get there. Welsh Government was a strong supporter both in the run-up to COP15, for example, through its commitment to the 30 by 30 targets and the biodiversity deep dive work, and and quickly committed to delivering the framework once it had been agreed, which is great. And I'll just pause for a moment, because you might think, why then do we need a new biodiversity bill? But this is the answer. I've nicked the headline from the recent Audit Wales report on the Section 6 biodiversity duty. Quite simply, the nature emergency hasn't been given a high enough priority so far. And RSPB's report in 2020, A Lost Decade for Nature, reflected on the failure of the UK, but the world at large, to respond to the previous decadal target to stop biodiversity loss, which obviously has still not happened. The evidence is presented in the State of Nature report. We're still seeing less nature in fewer places. Our report, Putting Wales on a Path to Nature Recovery, set out the case for legally binding targets, looking at examples around the world where robust targets do drive action for nature, but also at other policy areas where here in Wales we have embedded legal targets which are driving mainstream and action. And climate change is a really obvious example of that, where our legal net zero target has impacted on action, not only across government and the public sector, but the private sector too. Nature needs a response like that. So it's brilliant to have the commitment to the bill. We've had the consultation on the white paper, and obviously work is underway now by Welsh Government to work out what a framework of statutory targets looks like for Wales. And we at Wales Environment Link were asked to contribute to that by thinking about the targets that we would see as priorities for Wales' legal framework. So in reflecting on this, we reflected that the global framework, the 23 targets, are designed as a package. They complement each other. As I mentioned, a lot of them set out sort of the steps that we need to take to see the state of nature improve. We thought about, in thinking about our priorities, the outcomes that we want to see and the actions that are needed to get us there. Ultimately, we felt it's really important for Wales's legal framework to have a focus on what good looks like, and to create accountability in Wales around the state of nature. And we see 4 really key measures to that. Nature, biodiversity is made up of habitats and species. For habitats, we obviously need to restore extent. There has been a lot of habitat loss in Wales, but we need to understand where that species have enough space to thrive. We also need to understand the condition and set targets around the condition of habitats. And species, of course, are the building blocks of biodiversity. There are lots of different ways of looking at and measuring species populations, but their abundance, how many individuals there are, how populations are doing, and extinction risk. So what's the status of our species? Where are populations at risk? Is another really important measure. So the targets of the 23 global targets that we prioritised collectively were these ones. Target 2, to restore 30% of degraded ecosystems. Target 3, which is the 30 by 30 target, protecting and effectively managing 30% of land, water and seas. Target 4, about increasing species populations to healthy and resilient levels and halting extinctions. And target 7, to reduce pollution to levels that are not harmful for biodiversity. So there isn't a single measure that can tell us everything we need to know about biodiversity, and all of those elements will have measures attached to them, some of which we already have, some of which are under development. And in some cases, action-based targets will probably need to focus on making sure we have the information to start off with and to start measuring our progress. So, for example, the baseline assessment by NRW of the condition of our SSSIs showed a lot of gaps in our knowledge, and actually achieving a fuller understanding of the state of our protected areas is the important sort of early target in terms of enabling us to deliver on that habitat condition that we need. But ultimately, if we think about all the actions that need to sort of stack up behind biodiversity targets, species abundance is a really key measure, an index of sort of population trends. How are the building blocks of our biodiversity doing? Simply, the more healthy habitat we have, the higher the abundance of biodiversity we would expect. And an indicator of abundance that draws on data about a range of species groups is a reasonable proxy for ecosystem health, or for how sort of nature friendly our systems are. So in order to drive recovery in an index like this, we need to see systems changing. The sustainable farming scheme obviously has a massive role to play in this, given the extent of Wales's land that is farmed and the opportunities from nature-friendly farming, for example. The systems like planning our land and seas are also clearly really important. A species abundance indicator does exist for Wales. We reported in the State of Nature Report 2023, which is a huge partnership report of statutory and non-statutory bodies on a average species abundance indicator based on over 300 terrestrial and freshwater species, which was showing a decline of 20% over 3 decades since the mid-90s. And there's potential to develop this further. There's extensive work going on indicators at the moment. So the Environment Act 2021 sets up a framework of legally binding biodiversity targets for England. And it actually includes, on the face of the Act, a specified requirement for the government to set a target to halt the loss of species abundance by 2030. And that's backed up further in the framework of secondary legislation that brings in targets by a target to see an increase in species abundance by 2042. So in spite of sort of earlier proposals and calls from the Climate Change, Environment and Infrastructure Committee in the Senedd, Welsh Government has decided against including an overarching headline target within the bill, partly due to challenges with reporting on this. And you know, we can absolutely recognise the challenges of reporting on a very all-encompassing target. But we think, following the example of the Westminster Act and including a specified requirement around a species abundance target, essentially to reverse the direction of the downward trend in the next 10 years, offers a good compromise to that. Specifying a kind of bold commitment to bending that curve would secure a really robust legacy for this government and this Senedd, which have been so clear in their commitment to tackling the nature emergency, and would really encapsulate the urgency of action that's embedded in that global framework, making it clear that, you know, action is needed from the off. So diolch yn fawr, thank you for listening. I'm going to pass over to Kath now, who's going to talk about targets to tackle freshwater pollution. I'm going to finish finally with a photo of a cool bird and work out how to stop sharing my screen. But diolch yn fawr.
Thanks very much, Shani. Yes, so over to Kath.
Deal. Hopefully you are able to see my screen share.
Yes, thank you, Kath. Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody. So I'm going to talk today about how targets could help to address the challenges facing our freshwater habitats in Wales. So my name's Kath Lahane. I'm Senior Policy Advisor at WWF Cymru, and I work on agriculture and freshwater. So first of all, I'm just going to remind you about Target 7, so reducing pollution to levels that are not harmful to biodiversity. So Target 7 has a number of aspects within it. So it looks to reduce pollution risks and the negative impact of pollution from all sources by 2030 to levels that are not harmful to biodiversity and ecosystem functions and services, considering cumulative effects. And the three areas it focuses on are nutrients, pesticides and chemicals, and plastic. My presentation today is going to focus on the excess nutrient reduction portion of the target. Just to look at the problem to start with, so biodiversity has been in steep decline since 1970, with freshwater biodiversity showing the steepest decline at 85%. And yet we know that biodiversity is essential for life. It regulates the climate, it provides water and healthy soils. And we know that this decline in freshwater biodiversity is being caused by a number of things, so with freshwater pollution being high amongst them. And that problem in Wales is a continuing issue, as demonstrated by the recent NRW Water Framework Directive and SAC data, which shows that we haven't moved the dial on the Water Framework Directive and that we now have 7 out of 9 rivers failing for phosphorus, moving from 5 in 2021. And although we know that there are a number of drivers of freshwater pollution, an estimated 62% of overall phosphorus impact comes from rural land management across Wales, and that's therefore been the focus of our work. In some rivers, this impact's even higher, so there's an estimated 70% in the Western Cleddau and 84% in the Eastern. So as shown on the previous slide, this is having a significant impact on freshwater biodiversity. And as the species champion for salmon, I'm sure the Deputy First Minister is well aware that in Wales, salmon has declined by 70% over the past 10 years. So to unpick this problem and consider how Target 7 and the Biodiversity Bill could start to reverse this trend, we commissioned Steve Jennings, who's also on the call today, to undertake some research. The first portion of the research set out to look at the current policy landscape in Wales to see if we were on course to achieve Target 7's ambition to halve the nutrients lost to the environment by 2030. So starting with some policy mapping, all the legislation relevant to Wales, from international commitments such as the GBF, down to specific pieces of policy and legislation such as the control of agricultural pollution regulations and river basin management plans, were reviewed and mapped together. Then the effects of all this policy and legislation was quantified to see if it would add up to delivering the aims of Target 7. The conclusion from that research was that the current measures in Wales would not add up to be sufficient to deliver Target 7 of the GBF. For example, the estimated impact of the control of agricultural pollution regulations in their current form is unlikely to make more than a fairly minor impact, with some Welsh Government analysis of these regs, which were carried out before they were implemented, showing a reduction of 4.8% of the nitrate pollution load and a 6.8% reduction in the phosphorus pollution load. So this conclusion led us to our second piece of research, where a record was created of all of the relevant targets which relate to Wales in the water quality and nutrient space, the bodies responsible for meeting the target and the consequences of failure to do so, a description of the indicators used to measure the progress, and a description of monitoring protocols used to provide data for those indicators. This record was analysed and gaps and weaknesses were identified where they were preventing us from achieving Target 7. So the analysis resulted in the following conclusions. We have many targets already in place, but delivery against them has been glacial. Many aren't time-bound or specific. In terms of responsibilities, the actions to be taken if targets aren't met are unclear, absent, or at best require a revision to management plans. And there's a lack of explicit consequences for failing to deliver. there's a need to build on existing indicators with additional reporting of elements that directly respond to existing regulations and policy in Wales, and also to elements of the GBF, the Global Biodiversity Framework. In terms of monitoring, there don't appear to be any consequences of failing to monitor in any of the regulations. And while Natural Resources Wales uses the well-established water monitoring protocols, there's a lack of transparency with little publicly available information on what's measured and when, which allows very little external understanding, scrutiny, or constructive input into this monitoring. So the overall conclusion is that targets are in place, but they need to be strengthened. And really importantly, the scaffolding under the current targets, the monitoring, the responsibilities and the indicators is far too weak and is consequently preventing progress towards targets. So out of the conclusions of these two pieces of research, we developed some recommendations for the Biodiversity Bill. Firstly, that the freshwater targets in the Biodiversity Bill be linked to the commitments already made against international targets. So in this case, GBF Target 7 to reduce excess nutrient loss to the environment by half by 2030. We also recommend that 100% of water bodies be under active annual monitoring by 2030 with a transparent monitoring plan in place. And also that catchment-specific action plans are in place for all river catchments by 2028. But really importantly, to underpin all of this, there should be associated delivery plans which are time-bound and go beyond those in place now. There should be annually published progress reports, and there should be consequences for not meeting the targets. As shown in the presentation, though, it's not enough to have the targets in place in order to deliver the reduction in excess nutrients lost to the environment. We need to see action far over and above that that's set out in current policy and regulation. So to deliver towards Target 7, in terms of the issues associated with agriculture, we'd like to see Welsh Government develop and publish an action plan which supports a catchment level approach with associated delivery plans, funding, responsibility and timelines to tackle this water pollution. This action plan should not rely on voluntary action, which so far hasn't delivered improvements in the water environment to date. We'd also like to see a step change in monitoring and enforcement of pollution regs to move beyond an advice-led approach. The Sustainable Farming Scheme Universal Layer can be used as one lever to help tackle water quality issues, and that's something we're not seeing in the proposals to date. There are some limited actions that relate to water quality in the optional layer, but still very few. The SFS should incentivise at its core a focus on improving soil health and structure, reducing nutrient use, delivering riparian buffers, to name just a few, all of which would have additional benefits for nature, carbon storage, water retention, and therefore a reduction in flooding, not to mention farm business and sector resilience. Lastly, we believe it's vital to develop better oversight of activities in river catchments by including all high input, high output livestock farming in environmental permitting regulations, as well as reducing the threshold at which poultry units fall within EPR, and introducing effective requirements, including in the planning system, to prevent the cumulative effect of multiple livestock units. And cumulative is something that comes up in Target 7. So just to finish off, in conclusion, targets are important, but it's equally important that there's a strong foundation in place to deliver those targets, including clear timelines, responsibilities, and consequences. And this is a learning across all of the targets, not just Target 7. It can't be a paper exercise. All targets need a plausible delivery plan. They need to be mainstreamed. In some cases, incentives may need to be in place, and enforcement is key. Specifically in terms of fresh water in Wales, though, we're going to need to go beyond what we currently have in place if we want to shift the dial on freshwater biodiversity loss and improved water quality. So, diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much, Kath. I had an interesting meeting with Angela of the USC last Friday, a very strong campaigner taking forward citizen science and to activities of wild swimming and wild camping and connecting people to nature, and it was very interesting conversation. I'm very pleased to welcome Hugh Ranker Davis to the meeting. I think Hugh's been listening to your presentation, Kath. Hugh, of course, is Deputy First Minister and Cabinet Secretary for Climate Change and Rural Affairs, and it will be Hugh that will be taking the bill forward. Hugh, over to you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, John. Can I just check, first of all, that you can hear me?
Yes, that's fine. Thanks, Hugh.
Oh, that's brilliant. The reason I say that is I'm actually sitting in the foyer of a conference centre in a hospital in mid Wales, and I don't have Wi-Fi, don't have a room.
All right.
So I hope this is going to work okay. But as long as you can hear me, that's really good. And
It's
I hear
fine
the
at the
presentations
moment,
as well.
Hugh. Yeah.
That's brilliant. I heard the presentations as well, so thank you very much. It was really useful to have an insight to your thinking. And thanks to RSPB and WWF and everybody else involved in the group. Thrilled to be with you here today. And as you say, I'm taking forward the wide-ranging work that we're doing, not just on biodiversity targets and the legislation we're bringing forward, but also the wider work we're doing in terms of habitat restoration and nature restoration throughout Wales as well. And I start from the point that we're doing a lot of work, but we know that we've got to have a step change in what we do. It's often repeated, as MS is, we often repeat it, the fact that 1 in 6 species are at risk of extinction in Wales. That's not a good point to be in whatsoever. We're one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. But having said that, I don't want to go into a slough of despond over this to say that we can't do anything, because we can, and we've shown that we can. It's just that we need to have a step change in the urgency in which we deal with this. We've declared a nature emergency in Wales as well as a climate emergency, and we need to keep on acting on it and step up our actions on it. By the way, in saying that we do this, this is also good, I have to make clear, for not just the environment, but also social and cultural aspects within Wales, and also green jobs and the economy as well. And together we need to bottom out when we talk about driving this forward, that this is good on the green agenda in terms of the environment, but also the green agenda in terms of a range of economic sectors as well, including the way that we do things such as food production and tourism as well. We shouldn't lose sight of that, because that's a key to unlock this for many people out there across Wales as well. But listen, first of all, to say, protecting and restoring nature and helping more people to enjoy nature as well goes right to the heart of this Labour government. It's embedded in our approach in terms of a greener Wales and how we care and look after this and future generations as well. And it's, of course, it's underpinned by our approach in the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act, which John, amongst others, were key in bringing forward. If we look at some of, I said I didn't want to go into a sort of slough of despond on this, and I think it's important that we focus on the actions and the targets that we can do. But I just want to reflect for a moment briefly, John, on the work that we have done already, because it's not as if we haven't been together really putting our muscle to this in order to try and turn this around. This Senedd term alone, we've invested over £150 million across a range of schemes to improve access to nature on people's doorsteps and to restore habitat and species, and also to support farmers to manage their habitats more sustainably. But we've got to go further. What we do need is sustained action and transformative action. That's step change to tackle the climate and the nature emergencies. So that is why we're bringing forward the landmark legislation this Senedd term, which we need to get right. But if we get it right, will help us become a nature positive Wales. It'll provide the framework that we need to halt and reverse biodiversity loss. It'll set out the planning of our actions for delivery, and importantly, the monitoring and the reporting of our progress against targets that we'll set, and we need to get those targets right as well. And the bill, as you know, will also embed the environmental principles into Welsh law and establish, very importantly, a permanent environmental governance body for Wales. Now, I know we're focusing very much today on the specific biodiversity targets, and those targets are going to help us look right into the future as well as now, recognising that need for sustained, driven, long-term action. So the targets are important because they're going to focus our actions for biodiversity. They'll also, by the way, provide accountability on the Welsh ministers, whether it's me or somebody else sitting in the seat, to deliver for biodiversity in Wales now for the next 5, 10 and for future generations as well. They've got to reflect the ecosystems approach outlined in our existing legislation, but they've also got to look at the drivers of biodiversity loss as well. So reflecting our international obligations, my team of officials, many of you will know them because you'll have been engaged with them, have prioritised which of the global biodiversity framework targets are most important in Wales. So they've engaged with you, with many stakeholders, with many experts across Wales, and the Biodiversity Targets Advisory Panel has been providing expert input to that work as well. What I'm aiming to do is set a range of targets with your help that have got to contribute towards that halting and reversing biodiversity loss in Wales. So we need to get those targets right. We need to consider reducing the risk of extinction of our native species, and of course, the flip side of that, increasing abundance and genetic diversity as well. And within this piece as well, we've also got to consider the effective management of ecosystems, something that your speakers touched on as well, to make sure that we have resilient ecosystems that are sustained as well. Those drivers of biodiversity loss are also important, and your speakers have touched on this, including reducing pollution, including water pollution. In order to do that, we could have access to the right information. Everybody has to have access to the right information to support this work on biodiversity. So while we're introducing the targets to drive change that we need in Wales, we've got to recognise that these are going to underpin the programme of work to maintain and enhance biodiversity going forward. So let me touch on some of the work that's already been done again. The Nature Networks programme and Natur am Byth. Many of you will have been involved in these programmes. They've been working hard to improve not just the condition, but also the connectivity of some of our most precious habitats throughout Wales, helping a range of species to thrive. So the Nature Networks Fund alone has already had a significant positive impact. There are more than 90 projects now funded, over £54 million that we've awarded since 2021. And of course, this is working in partnership with NRW and the Heritage Lottery Fund as well. It also gives me, a great thrill today to announce that we're announcing a further 13 projects have now been awarded over £10 million in the latest round of the Nature Networks Fund as well. So we're keeping that work doing. This, by the way, includes an additional allocation of over £2 million to allow a further 5 projects to gain funding on top of what we were doing. Now, that's a fantastic boost again for nature. So we've got to effectively manage our ecosystems, as I've said, to support these species and the benefits of nature that we rely on. But just to give you an idea in layperson's terms of what this means, we're now actually protecting an area that's equivalent to hundreds of thousands of rugby pitches of habitat, which are now under restoration, that weren't under restoration before. If you look at the National Peatland Action Programme, that is equivalent to over 3,000 rugby pitches equivalent of peat. We've reached our target a year ahead of time. It's taken out around 6 million tonnes of carbon that has been safeguarded. It's reduced carbon emissions by about 8,000 tonnes per year. It's the equivalent of something like 6,000 car emissions. That is a hugely significant input to what we're trying to do, and we need to do more. But the peatland restoration, of course, also supports improving water quality and also supports natural flood management. This is win-win-win right across the piece there. So if we can get the targets right across the piece, we can drive our ambition for this effective management further. The pollution piece, in the many forms, I have to say, that it presents itself, is a massive driver of biodiversity loss. We've heard this in the presentations this morning. And the public, rightly, feel really impassioned about this and sometimes angry about this as well. They want to see improved water quality. They want to see restoration of all our rivers, all our watercourses. They're right to feel that way. So that's why we've also given NRW an extra £40 million of funding to do just that. Some of the work that we're doing is not cheap at all, as you know, but I recently visited the River Dowlais, a tributary there, where the river has been re-wiggled. It sounds like a simple process. Sometimes it is more simple than others, but actually the work we were looking at was major engineering, multi-million pound, very expensive, very well informed, and it's to do with tackling pollution. It's to do with restoring biodiversity, to allow species to flow up that river, migratory species as well as invertebrates and so on. Incredible piece of work, and we're doing lots of that. So creating those natural habitats, it's an example, just one example of many I've seen, of the way we're spending money to actually bring benefits to water quality and biodiversity. And there's other aspects that your stakeholders will know on the CPG as well, John. Things like the work we're doing on the end of gear fishing life programme. It's collected 12 tonnes of gear now across our Welsh marine environment, and we're going to do more as well. And we're leading the way on that. Wales is leading the way on that. So I've said it's imperative that as we look for the targets, that we need to get them right. So getting the robust evidence-based targets does take a bit of time. We need to get this right. We need to gather the evidence, engage with you and stakeholders and the expert advice we're having, develop the right indicators so we're able to measure progress and model to ensure that we meet our ambition. And just to say as well, through the existing duties we have, the Section 6 duties with the Environment Act Wales 2016, we will make a clear plan on how we will deliver on the targets. We will, through that, work closely with all the public authorities to deliver on the targets and ensure as well, by the way, that the guidance is very clear to optimise the delivery towards these targets. The guidance needs to be right as well. Now, as part of the bill, the legislation going forward, there's going to be a new duty on ministers to promote awareness of the importance of biodiversity and the threats to biodiversity. This is also an important piece of working towards reconnecting people to nature and the importance and the value of nature and how integral it is to us as people who live on the benefits of the natural environment when that natural environment is healthy and working well. So look, my officials are working really hard to bring these targets forward as soon as possible. However, we've got to make sure that the targets are really robust, scientifically, evidence-based, and that they actually deliver for biodiversity in Wales. So that work with stakeholders and experts will continue, and we will focus on, I know I sometimes disparage the phrase, but it has to be a collective Team Wales approach to how we deliver these targets and then drive them forward, use them to drive forward change. My closing remarks, John, just to say, if we restore nature, as I begin with, we're going to deliver multiple future benefits. We will, of course, improve our resilience to climate change. We'll strengthen our ability to more effectively manage the land and the sea sustainably for now and future generations. And we'll also drive as well, I have to say, green skills and green jobs within this space as well. The best legacy we can leave future generations is a recovering, improving natural environment that can support them as it has supported us. So listen, I hope to all of the stakeholders there, you can work with us, support the bill, the Environment Bill as it passes through the Senedd stages, and support Wales continuing to do some amazing work on nature restoration and lift us to the next level. Listen, John, I've got to apologise for early departure as well. I'm on the way to a funeral up here in Mid Wales today, but I'm looking forward to discussing the bill further with individual stakeholders as well. My officials are really engaged with stakeholders and with WELL members as well, and we want to carry this process through with intense engagement from here all the way to, hopefully, please, actually getting the royal assent for the bill and then working on everything that flows from it. John, I hope that's helpful, but thanks for having me today.
Thanks very much, Hugh. We've got a Q&A later, Hugh, and perhaps if there are questions for you, we could feed them through and then share the answers with members of the cross-party group, if that's okay.
That's brilliant. Thank you, John.
Okay, diolch yn fawr, Hugh. Thanks very much. Okay, our next presentation then is from Rachel Hoffman, Head of Global for Plant Life Cymru.
Gosh, John, just see if
Rachel.
I can share my screen. Is that...
Yeah, that looks great.
Sorry, I'm just trying to move something. Yeah, so good morning. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. My name is Rachel Hoffman and I'm Head of Global at Plant Life. So it'll be no surprise to you today that I'm going to talk to you about the global strategy for plant conservation and how its actions help to meet the targets of the global biodiversity framework. Because I work at the international level, my talk will focus more on the global context of these strategies and frameworks, and then I'll hand the baton over to my colleague Meg Griffiths, Plant Life's Conservation Officer, to provide the Welsh perspective. So as Annie mentioned, most of you will be aware that in 2022, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, referred to as the Coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, was adopted. I'll refer to this as the GBF in the rest of my talk. Plant Life attended the conference with our partner, the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, and since we're the only planty people present, we needed to be a very loud voice representing our community. Our priority was to advocate for a decision that as part of the adoption of the GBF, a third phase of the global strategy for plant conservation could go ahead, which would support implementation of the targets of the agreement. So here's a timeline of the GSPC. It started back in 1999 at a resolution of the 16th Botanical Congress, right through to the adoption of the newest and third iteration, which was adopted by the parties at COP16. As you can see, it's been a long journey and often rather painfully slow, but we are now at a pivotal moment to capitalise on this momentum and use the strategy to scale up and deliver action for plants both globally and nationally. Plant Life has a long history with the GSPC, contributing to its various iterations and advocating for its adoption when needed. We strongly believe it has had and continues to have a crucial role in recognising the special importance of plants and shines a light on plant conservation globally. It has also been a valuable tool in mobilising the plant conservation community, contributing to the development of national plant conservation strategies and action plans, particularly in mega-diverse countries such as Brazil, China, Colombia, Mexico, and South Africa. It provides a clear framework for action with clear, easily understood actions, and it stimulates action at both global and national levels. Much more plant conservation progress has been made than without the GSPC, and will continue to do so if, as Plant Life firmly believes and advocates for, that we engage in a whole-of-society approach for its successful implementation. So the rest of my presentation will hopefully show why the GSPC is directly relevant to delivering targets of the GBF. So a reflection at this point may be, why do we need a GSPC since we already have the Global Biodiversity Framework? While plants and fungi are the foundation of our habitats and ecosystems, when we see the world for its greenness, we see plant and fungal diversity, and we see the support system for all life on Earth. And yet a report published by Kew in 2023 estimated that 45% of all flowering plants are threatened with extinction, and more than 1 in 3 tree species worldwide are also at risk of extinction. There is therefore an urgent need to focus more attention on the specific conservation requirements of plants and ensure they are not overlooked in broader biodiversity frameworks. And when we deliver action for plants, we know we'll gain larger conservation gains across all species groups. The new GSPC is made of 21 what we call voluntary plant conservation actions, which, as I've previously mentioned, harmonise with the targets of the GBF. It was specifically designed this way to make it easy for parties and non-state actors to integrate plant action and report progress within their commitments to the GBF. It has clear synergies across other UN frameworks, and it focuses also on IPLC engagement. This is of particular importance because we want to empower local communities and invest in effective grassroots initiatives. Locally led action puts local communities in charge, applying their knowledge and management practices to drive effective conservation efforts. With regards to the tools and solution goals of the strategy, Plant Life has been creating a new tool which we hope will be a helpful resource to support implementation of the GSPC. We have been developing a toolkit to provide useful, accessible information and guide all sectors of society on how to implement the plant action using, for example, a broad range of case studies and stories of success showing how the different actions are being delivered on the ground. The image you see here are the icons we have designed that relate to the branding of the GBF to represent those actions. We want the toolkit to be a user-friendly one-stop shop for all things related to the GSPC. The background, the history, the details of the actions, and as I mentioned, a broad range of case studies. Now, I want to give you a quick couple of examples highlighting how countries have effectively engaged with the GSP. These were recently presented at the Global Partnership for Plant Conservation in the US. So South Africa's efforts in plant conservation are driven by the South African National Biodiversity Institute, known as SANBI. This is a government body, and this helps with its streamlining and integration of plant conservation into national priorities. Their current strategy, which they are actually updating now, focuses on addressing gaps in plant conservation and setting clear targets modified to fit South Africa's diverse context. And you can see here that they've been very successful in this strategy that they've had in place, and there's some of the results of that strategy on the slide. It also prioritizes education, public engagement, capacity development with courses, internships, and partnerships. Their approach has and continues to be to directly link their plant conservation strategy to the MBSAP, ensuring their progress is included in national reporting. In Scotland, there is a strong governmental support for environmental issues, which provides a solid platform for plant conservation. It has well-structured statutory and reporting frameworks, including a new Natural Environment Bill and a Scottish Biodiversity Strategy with 5-year implementation plans. This gives space to drop in the plant biodiversity plan, so there's lots of good alignment. NatureScot was provided with the resources to lead, and stakeholder engagement has been key. We've talked a lot about that importance of that stakeholder engagement in previous talks. PlantLife, for example, has been heavily involved as a supporting organisation, as well as connecting with farmers and landowners. Although, as I'm sure many of you know, building these relationships, establishing the trust and buy-in does take time. Because Scotland has its own Scottish biodiversity strategy, which already includes plant conservation, there has been a bit of a struggle to revisit this and align it with the GSPC due to time and capacity constraints. So the decision was made to rationalise those actions down to a list of 10 to make it more manageable for stakeholder engagement. As I'm sure you're only too familiar with here in Wales, the challenges have been harder at the UK level, not the subnational, as reporting to CBD is channeled through DEFRA and JNCC, which may tilt the bias towards an England focus, and it can be harder to report Scottish progress and Wales progress and actions for those to be reported on and fed back. So I'm just going to show you here how Scotland distilled those actions down and give you a bit of time to look at those. As you can see, when they've distilled those targets, they've related those back to those voluntary actions in the global strategy for plants. So finally, we've talked a lot actually today about the importance of indicators and monitoring, because we need those indicators to do that monitoring. And it's a key priority of the GSPC. Botanic Gardens Conservation International is in their capacity as the Secretariat for the Global Partnership for Plant Conservation, are producing a monitoring and reporting framework that will include indicators based on those headline indicators in the GBF. The aim is to remove the reporting burden from parties and encourage non-state actors to report their conservation activities via this framework, so that BGCI can channel it back through to the CBD. We see this reporting as key to showcasing all the great work that has been done for plant conservation and encouraging and guide others in their actions. So thank you for listening. Now I'm going to go over to Meg to talk about this in the Welsh context.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Over to Meg.
Diolch, Rachel. Just let me see. Can people let me know if they can see my screen?
Yes, thanks, Meg.
That's working. Okay, perfect. Well, Diolch yn fawr, a bore da pawb. My name is Meg Griffiths and I'm Action for Species Officer with Plant Life Cymru. And as Rachel's mentioned, it's my job to try and explain some thinking about how we get from these high-level international targets and global plant actions down to nature recovery action on the ground in Wales. And I think it's fair to say that there is a fair degree of social dissonance around the GBF targets. Individuals don't necessarily feel like they're relevant to them because they're so high up. But of course, we need to remember that any action for nature that happens anywhere, it will always happen at the local level. So we need to have this clear chain of delivery and read across from high level targets to action on the ground. So I'm starting with this idealized process, outlining the steps required to get that read across. And you can see it moving from the sort of international sphere through increasing granularity down to the local level. And I'll use this metaphor as a chain for the rest of the presentation. But just to start off with setting the scene a bit, I'm sure you'll all be aware, but just so that we're all on equal footing, the Welsh context. As the Deputy First Minister mentioned, we've got the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which is a really sort of guiding principle and a very singular piece of progressive environmental legislation. And it's very unique because it provides an actual framework, a policy framework for integrating people with nature. And as Rachel explained, and as we're all aware, that mainstreaming is so fundamental. The Act draws on the seventh generation principle, which encourages decision making that not only benefits decision makers today, but also benefits the next 7 generations. So it's sort of emphasizing the importance of that long-term sustainability and the interconnectedness of humans with the natural ecosystems. Excuse me, sorry. And so then we have the Nature Recovery Action Plan. That is Wales's primary strategic plan for biodiversity. And this was also created in 2015 to align with the CBD goals. And it was sort of drawn up in the recognition that Wales was really far from reaching international commitments to biodiversity at that time without additional legislative momentum. And then off the back of all that, we've also got the Environment Act Wales, which, as Hugh Davis mentioned, one of the key elements of that was really enhancing the biodiversity duty, placing this duty on public authorities to increase the resilience of ecosystems. And in order to do that, there's the requirement that public authorities need to establish a plan outlining what they propose to do to comply with their biodiversity duty, but also reporting on action that they are doing towards that plan. So against that backdrop, also to mention a lot of the good work that's been done to try and inform a really robust understanding of nature recovery in Wales. We've had the Naturiol Ni Citizens Assembly. Experts have been convened through the biodiversity deep dive to pull together science-driven, evidence-led recommendations. And all of this information to get that sort of social perspective on nature recovery and what's required to deliver action at the scale and the pace that we need to see it. So, hope my animations work. Here we go. The first step of the chain. Rachel and the other speakers have already outlined the international targets, the GBF, and the accompanying GSPC actions. So the next step, what's that then? Well, it is to produce the NBSAP, which is a National Biodiversity Strategy Action Plan. And all of the different CBD signatory countries, everyone who signed up to the GBF, is required to produce their NBSAPs. So that's to kind of map out the actionable steps that are going to ensure cohesion and ensure action in this chain. So what does that look like? So the UK published their NBSAP, I think it was a month ago, and it's pretty high level, but there are specific actions within it for Wales. And these are namely to revise the 2015 Nature Recovery Action Plan, which had already actually been revised in 2021, but it will be revised again, to make it more current, more appropriate for the current sort of ecological, environmental landscape. And The second action is to publish and enshrine statutory targets for nature in law. So that is what we're seeing with the drafting of the Environmental Principles, Nature Targets and Governance Bill, which will be really important for creating that statutory legal framework for driving accountability and momentum towards nature recovery. So between those two actions set out in the NBTAP, we see devolved nature targets, the subnational, that's the Environmental Principles Bill coming up, and devolved action plan, Nature Recovery Action Plan revision. So we're starting to see the sort of linkages really getting populated closer towards the action on the ground. But what is happening here at the local level? And this is a really, really important question, because the local level is so crucial in that locally led planning by public authorities, it exists in that space between ambition and action. And it is what actually translates all of that legislation into direct action on the ground. It also produces, local action produces conservation approaches that are place appropriate, ensuring a sort of place planning approach, which Cardiff University Wales, for those who were on the call on Tuesday, has been identified as being really, really important to the people of Wales. And it results in these approaches which are place appropriate and suited to the local character of an area. So they sort of combat the more homogenous one size fits all top down ideals. So what's happening at the local level? Well, as Annie mentioned, we have Audit Wales's most recent research looking at the delivery of the biodiversity and resilience duty set out in Section 6 of the Environment Act Wales. And unfortunately, they've flagged that the nature emergency has not been a high enough priority. We're seeing over half of public authorities haven't complied with their duty to produce these plans or report on their action for enhanced biodiversity. And so to really understand that sort of the chain, we need to remember that like a chain is only as strong as its weakest point, and trying to address barriers which are integrated at this level is going to be really, really essential to enabling action on the ground. So we need to ask why it is that public authorities haven't been able to produce these plans, and what are the barriers to participation? How do we deliver those? And unsurprisingly, perhaps many public authorities did report that financial and resourcing barriers were holding back delivery. 62% felt that they weren't being provided with effective support and guidance to help them comply with the duty, which is why it's extremely encouraging to hear the Deputy First Minister's commitment to refreshing that guidance and really providing better support to enable this whole of society approach and this mainstreaming. Another issue that was flagged was that this was from the Naturani Citizens Assembly, highlighted that people don't feel confident to be able to take action for nature because they don't have enough clarity around what they could do safely to deliver nature positivity. And so this is where the global plant actions that Rachel set the scene for are really, really, really powerful. As Rachel explained, they're all directly related to the GBF and grouped within the same overarching goals that the GBF adheres to. And the best thing about them is that they are actionable, they're actions. They have this direct read across, and they empower and upskill anybody from non-state actors, local government, public bodies to deliver action for plants, which will reliably deliver action for other species and nature recovery as a whole. And point that Rachel mentioned about the monitoring and reporting framework that BGCI are producing is really fundamental as well, because there's two elements to meeting targets. We have doing the actual action itself and seeing the change in terms of environmental improvement, and then there's the monitoring, evaluation and reporting that's required to show that that's been done. And I think at the moment that there is a lot of good work that's being done, and it's just not being reported on because the mechanisms aren't in place. So what, in terms of the monitoring and reporting, there needs to be this, it needs to happen at each stage of the chain in order to meet those targets. And that sounds like a whole lot of admin, especially for local authorities who, and all authorities who are resource and capacity limited, have these administrative burdens put on top of their plates. And there needs to be this sort of recognition of this burden that they're having to deal with. But that is what is so wonderful about the GSPC plant actions, and this monitoring and reporting framework, which the BGCI are developing, is going to be a huge game changer in this space, or it has the potential to be, because it will allow these targets to be shared and reported on independently, as part of this whole of society approach. So any action that gets carried out towards those, be that by organisations, local authorities, non-state actors, or whatever, they're guaranteed to be feeding into GBF reporting. So as long as those actions are being aligned with sort of terminology and language which is built into the local plans or the nature recovery action plan, then we will see that read across, without it being a sort of really onerous process. And just to sort of touch on the fact that that there is a lot of good work that's being done, but there's just no mechanism in place for allowing that to be reported on. The processes aren't there to facilitate a read across. So, for example, the Nature Recovery Action Plan, its objective 1 in its current form is to engage in support, participation and understanding, to embed biodiversity in decision making. Well, that falls into GBF target 14 around mainstreaming, and there is an accompanying GSPC action for that. The same is true of objective 2, which is about all about species and recovering genetic diversity. So we see that there is clear read across, and there are synergies between the existing Nature Recovery Action Plan and the GBF, which can be brought together in a similar exercise to the one that Scotland have been through, to sort of highlight where we can get that harmonisation, and make sure that everything's being reported on and neatly streamlined, feeding up to the GSPC. Oh, and the same for that was just another example, another objective. So yes, to refresh, with the establishment of a strong legal framework in place, that is upcoming, to sort of drive accountability and action, then we complete this step in the chain. The production of the Environmental Principles Bill has huge potential to be a really sort of landmark piece of legislation in this space. The revision of the Nature Recovery Action Plan, if that can be aligned in a way that has synergies with the plant actions, then we can get that crucial read across and see a much needed strengthening and reinforcement of that chain, to enable local authorities to be able to deliver that work. And then we're down to action for nature. So that's a very whistle-stop tour, but just to emphasise that we really are in a really pivotal moment. This is a chance for the Welsh Government to lead by example and support improvement to nature recovery action, and take more of an active interest in the application of their own legislation at the local level. And Wales has already shown real leadership on the global stage when it comes to ecosystem resilience and how that relates to social well-being. And so we're just at a point where we have loads to gain and many resources available to enable cohesive action. Making sure that the upcoming Environmental Principles Bill gets the prioritisation and the recognition it deserves in terms of its environmental impact and, by extension, its socio-economic impact, recognising that action for biodiversity is action across all other of our agendas, and sustainability agendas. So this bill will be a vital step in reversing nature loss for future generations and creating a more prosperous and resilient Wales, which of course we all want to see. So diolch yn fawr pawb. Just to say that we'd be very happy to discuss this further with anybody who's interested. We have the toolkit we can provide. We can send a link round to that after the call, along with emails. And just to note that our new head of Plant Life Cymru, Leslie Fletcher, will be in post as of May, and I'm sure she's going to be central to sort of continuing many of these conversations forward. So diolch yn fawr, and I'll stop sharing there.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, has it stopped sharing? No. There we go.
That's fine. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Meg. Okay, we've reached our Q&A then. If there are, we'll have a look at the questions and the chat later, and anything that's relevant for Hewitt Ranker and the bill, we will feed through and hopefully get responses and then share them with members of this cross-party group. But now it's the Q&A for our Zoom meeting and also for the YouTube chat stream. So I hope somebody on this call can look at all of that. So just raise your hands if you'd like to ask a question of any of our presenters or generally.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye on the YouTube chat. There's nothing yet. But
Nothing yet. Dan Ward, Dan, you've put a couple of things in the chat. Do you want to just ask on those, and perhaps we'll get some responses now?
Yeah, so not so much a question, but a suggestion, which potentially could go to Hugh, I suppose. It's something that we thought about on the Wales Net Zero 2035 Commission, which is on the Section 6 guidance for public authority authorities, where at the moment they've got to kind of give regard to in their delivery of their duties for biodiversity and so on. One of the things I think, thinking of all the municipal space and so on, is that just updating the guidance. So actually, biodiversity should be your default management, unless it conflicts with the primary purpose. So because also we're not expecting sports fields to be managed to be turned into meadows and so on. But I think some of that, maybe that would help get around some of that, some of the barriers of people not feeling like they not having the capacity to be able to push these things through and so on, and it puts the onus on proving not to.
Yeah, okay, Dan, well, we can certainly feed that through. And
yeah, I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts or opinions on that.
Anybody like to offer a comment or review?
Just to add that, sorry, I didn't know how to put my hand up in Zoom, but so our road verges and amenity green space advisor, Mark Schofield, who's sort of really trying to drive things forward in this field in terms of like the sort of management of municipal spaces and whatnot, and he's been doing some calculations that if I can't remember the exact figure, but if a 5 to 10 meter strip of wildflower habitat, meadow habitat essentially, were to border every single sports field in the UK, the actual contribution in terms of species expression, I can't remember the figure, but it was just absolutely mind-blowingly significant. And then the sort of double benefits that can create, like mowing paths through that, and allows more recreational enjoyment because you're in a sort of more flower rich, nectar rich habitat, the pollinators are happy, and there's so many different benefits to it. So I think that would be a really powerful thing to mention. Dan.
Thanks very much, Meg. Cass, I wonder if I could just ask you, as I said, I met with Angela Jones of Save Our Rivers and Save the Usk, and she also campaigns very much in terms of the River Wye. She has done for quite some time. We're trying to arrange for her to meet with Hewitt Ranker, just for her to set out her concerns about pollution of our rivers and what might be done. I think she's thinking of asking for a water bill. I did explain to her that, it's a very congested legislative timetable. There's only a year to go in this Senedd. And of course, we got the Environment Bill coming forward. We would hope, Kath, wouldn't we, that, if we get that Environment Bill right, it's going to address those water pollution issues in terms of farming, Welsh water, industry, and, hopefully everything else. Delyth?
Diolch, John. I know that Sue has had it as well. Sue, sorry that I've just leapfrogged you. I was just wondering, with that, John, I know that a number of us would probably be happy to work together on amendments to that bill if there were ways, even if we could put down probing amendments to kind of keep some of the issues on the agenda. maybe that's something we could work together on.
Yeah, absolutely, Delith. Yeah, and working with the organisations that we have on this call, hopefully. What do you think, Kath? Does anything strike you in particular in terms of, that campaign to save our rivers and the forthcoming legislation and the connections?
Yeah, so there are lots of campaigns ongoing on individual rivers around Wales, which we're actually looking to map at the moment so that we get a really good idea of all of those local action groups working on rivers. I think that there is quite a lot of, we do have quite a lot of policy in this area. The problem is that it's not strong enough at the moment. There isn't enough action, and I think particularly the river pollution summits that were ongoing until July last year were looking to deliver some action in this area, but what perhaps was missing was that focus on agriculture. So I think there does need to be a real focus on agriculture, and that's where we come to this action plan for agriculture with some sort of associated funding timelines and requirement for action. So I think that's really where we'd like to focus, and that would have to be at a catchment level. So that would tie into these individual, rivers groups that are working on the particular problems in their area, because it's different in every area. So I think our thoughts are really that there needs to be a focus on agriculture, because the current SFS and the control of agricultural pollution regs at the moment are not going to deliver what the change that we need.
Yeah. Okay, Kath. Thank you very much. Anybody else like to?
Sue still got her hand up.
Sorry?
Sue Evans still got her hand up.
All right, Sue.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I was just going to come back on the local authorities and some of the problems that they face. And one of the biggest issues, I think, and particularly with the following on from the plant life, is the public misconception about tidiness. I think that a campaign or putting right the misunderstanding about tidiness and tidy verges, hedges, would make a big difference, because an awful lot of pressure comes from the public complaining that things don't look tidy. And I think if we could persuade the public to understand more that untidiness is usually a sign in when you've got plant life in particular, that something is actually thriving from an environmental position.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sue. Delith, did I see your hand raised?
Again, forgive me, I just wanted to agree with Sue completely. And this is something that's come up so much in the Senedd. I know John feels really strongly about it as well. And just, I think that's true about public spaces, but also any awareness raising that can be done about people's gardens as well. Because I think that an awful lot of the time there is this pressure that people feel from neighbours even, that they need to keep their garden as like this manufactured, really, really short, like a carpet of lawn. And actually, I think if it looks a bit messier, if you've got long grass growing and things like that, it actually looks better, quite apart from anything else. But I think that we need more of awareness raising, and oh my God, if we can ban plastic grass, please.
Yeah, absolutely, Dennis. Okay, we've got.
Can I come back just on that one? I mean, this affects farmers as well. It's a big problem for farming community, and it's not just farmers judging other farmers, but it is the local community judging the farmers as well. And it puts a huge pressure on them to have to top their fields in September, which takes off all of the grass seeds for the birds over the winter then. And this is a big problem, much bigger, I think, than we recognise.
Okay, Sue, thanks very much. We've got a question from Katie Orford in the chat. What can be learned from the passage of the Environment Bill in England? And perhaps it's too soon for the Scottish Nature Bill, but possibly that as well. On the biodiversity target provisions, for example, timescales for targets to come forward.
Sorry, John, just wondering, Meg, was your hand up to respond to the previous point before we move on to Katie's question?
It was. If people have some time to think about that, but it was just to say that there needs to be a quite cultural shift, and I think just with anything, manicured lawns and tidiness, like it's just part of it's a trend, and there's all these pieces that, you know, they weren't lawns until Victorian ages, and then lawns were a sort of a symbol of wealth and affluence, etc., because you had the luxury of not having to allocate land to biodiversity support. Like before that, species rich grasslands and meadows would have been the norm. So it's just part of the sort of slow change of making people more aware that there can be other ways, and sort of in terms of the sort of green space management, things like having a designated area for areas for mowing for meadows, and then having the edge mown, just to show that there is still a degree of you know, it's still kept, it's still being looked after, it's not just gone derelict. So those kinds of things are important. And the Welsh Government's It's For Them campaign, which I think Kathleen Carroll was running, that's, you know, all about trying to sort of justify messy areas by saying it's for them. You know, we're doing it for these species. They require them. You know, we share this earth with other organisms, and so I think that was really powerful. And yeah, can hopefully see more of that and keep that conversation moving.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions for Hugh that we'll feed through. Does anybody want to respond to that possible learning from the English bill, or indeed the Scottish one? Kath?
Yeah, I think one learning from the English bill is that they didn't actually, that they set targets, but they didn't actually model how to achieve the targets. So they have, you know, at the time brought in the SFI for agriculture and said, you know, this is going to achieve our targets, but well, you don't know that until you actually model what you need to do in order to achieve the targets, and look at the gap between the two. And I think that that's an important thing that we need to do. What do we actually need to do to achieve the targets, and how are we going to measure that we're getting there?
Okay, Kath.
I think I could just quickly offer a comment on Katie's question as well, because the CCI committee spent a bit of time talking to the Deputy First Minister about the suggestion that it could take sort of 3 years to get a suite of targets into our legislation after the bill is passed. And I know that was an issue that committee members were very concerned about, and which is a concern to lots of us, because 3 years downstream of the bill, we're getting to 2029 and 2030 targets become, you know, almost silly at that point. So I think, you know, the Environment Act 2021 had a 1 year time frame for bringing targets forward. Scotland has proposed a year after commencement, which gives a bit of wiggle room, but is still likely to be within a couple of years. So I think that is a really key area to encourage the Welsh Government to be more ambitious, really, in terms of bringing forward the first suite of targets.
Okay, Annie, thanks so much. And Dan Ward?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting thing in terms of action on those targets as well, which would be good for us to maybe, could we provide a steer to Welsh Government, which is, what does it, you know, incremental improvement look like if we're on hitting the 2030 targets? Because actually incremental improvement at the scale that we're talking about is big areas. It's like, these aren't small. It's not small projects, and we kind of need all the projects to get the same kind of scale as the peatland restoration work, or larger, and it has to happen in rapid time as well. So I think that might actually be helpful to define, to say, you know, small incremental steps is areas of 10,000 hectares plus at a time, you know, that kind of thing, and kind of fast action on species restoration, etc. as well.
Okay, Dan, thank you very much. We've got a question in the chat from Chris. Where does prioritization come in? We don't have unlimited resources. Some biodiversity is more at risk. Who would like to address that prioritization?
I'd just offer a quick comment in that I think that's of course an absolutely fair point, and prioritizing resources in terms of where it's needed for species recovery, habitat restoration, etc., is going to be key. I think we we talk about a variety of different measures, some of which are about getting the conditions right for biodiversity to thrive. 30 by 30 target is a lot about that, and target 7, which Kath talked about, but focusing on outcomes as well that kind of encompass all of that progress. So sort of looking at what we need to increase species populations overall and have a greater abundance of wildlife. There's a lot of actions that are already much discussed, and I think this goes back to what Kath said as well about, what do you need to do to drive this progress. So the sustainable farming scheme, for example, in enabling farming to become much more nature friendly, has the opportunity to provide much more space and really give a boost to those species populations. So I think there's a kind of combination of broader nature friendly actions with very targeted species recovery that, of course, will require prioritised and focused efforts. And Meg's going to come in with something much more lucid, I'm sure.
No, Annie, that was it was sort of follows on really perfectly from what you were saying about that sort of double sort of pronged approach, and also that sort of the scale of prioritization, the scale at which you're prioritizing, like depends a lot. It can change sort of significantly which different view you're looking at things from. So, like at a national level, nationally and internationally, declining species and species that are at risk at that scale, they have to be prioritized. But equally, you would have local priorities where you might have species that are regionally sort of in decline, but they might not get being picked up at the national level, because of this need to facilitate to conserve resources and be strategic about how they're allocated. And I also think that that's why sort of more decentralized decision making and local action has so much power, because if people are able to establish those local priority lists, they can respond to them directly at that space, leaving it to more national and state actors to deliver for species which are at a sort of more significant on the international level and stage. So yeah, it depends where you're looking at it, I suppose, but also, like Annie said, having sort of efforts to boost abundance and increase habitat heterogeneity, support dynamic processes and support species, while also having this other approach to target action specifically for the species that we're losing, because losing species further destabilizes ecosystems, and there needs to be that targeted management for our most at-risk groups.
Yeah, and I just want to add on there as well. I think it comes back, that scale piece is really important here, because I think actually if things are done at sufficient scale, then you're reducing your risk significantly. And not all of these things are resource intensive. Some of it is just having bold decision making in terms of, making closed areas in the marine systems and so on, or kind of updating policy guidance, etc. In terrestrial systems, to then free up the resource for the areas that really do need like those kind of higher intensity interventions.
Thanks for that, Dan. We're rapidly running out of time, so we'll just take Fergus, and then we'll have to briefly deal with our AGM. Fergus.
Thank you. It's just a short point. We've got, Fergus O'Brien, Welsh Water here. We've got a very large investment program, about £1.5 billion that we're investing for enhancement on environment this coming 5 years. An awful lot of that is focused on water quality, but actually there's opportunities in that investment if we can have the regulatory framework to operate within. At the moment, we're very much focused on what comes out the end of a pipe, and the opportunity to build in nature-based solutions and to take a more nature and also more habitat focused type solution is quite limited. If we understand that NRW are really stretched for their resource, we understand how local authorities are very stretched for their resource. So actually, I think I would encourage something that reflected their need as well as our need to be able to deliver those more holistic solutions, if I can put it that way, and things that can deliver greater value than just purely what do we, sticking big concrete tanks in our sewerage network or the like, because that's the way everything's being driven just at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Fergus. As I say, we've only got a few minutes, so we need to deal with our AGM. Essentially, electing chairs, vice chairs, secretariat. Liz, I think this is probably where I need to sit back, as it were, and hand over to you.
Yeah, well, so we've had, unfortunately, there was a number of clashes with other Senedd members, but Janet Finch-Saunders nominated John for chair again over email.
Happy to second that.
There we go. So, John, you're back.
Thank you very much. And
would
I'm
you like
sure,
to nominate Delith for vice chair, perhaps?
Yes, absolutely. Nominate Delith as vice chair.
I don't know if I can second. Can someone else second?
Can I second that? Is one of us?
Yeah, sure. We're all members.
There you are. Lots of seconders, Delith. And secretariat, I think we'd be very pleased. Now I'm back in the chair if the secretariat was to continue, Liz.
And I second that very much.
Diolch, Delith.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that was very short and sweet. I think that's it. So we will. Oh, sorry, Tess.
I was just doing a little applause emoji.
Oh, you're sorry.
Rather than a hands up. Sorry.
Yeah, not a hands up.
Because John, I'm always like a little bit stressed when these things happen because it's just like there's a part of me that always craves drama. So I'm like, what if someone says I object, and like it would be chaotic, but it would also be dramatic.
I hope you don't go to too many weddings, Darren, when they ask the question. Okay, well, look, thank you all very much for attending, and we will look through the chat and reflect on the meeting and put those points to Hugh, and then return to cross-party group members with the responses. Thank you all very much, and let's hope we can get that bill right, because obviously it's a major part of doing what we all think needs to be done here in Wales for our climate, environment and nature. Thank you all very much. Diolch.